Okay, let's talk about what are unbalanced forces. So unbalanced forces are those forces which are not balanced. Of course, you could just guess that by its name, but let's actually discuss an example in which we have an unbalanced force. So for example, we have this object again appearing in our videos. So a force of 10 Newton is acting on this object in the rightward direction, but a force of, for example, 7 Newton is actually acting on the leftward direction. So we could say that, yeah, the force of 10 Newton is greater than the force of 7 Newtons. So there would be if we resolve these forces to find the resultant force, then we must assign the positive direction, positive sign to the rightward direction and negative sign to the leftward direction, and then we just resolve them. So 10 minus 7 plus 10 minus 7 would be actually plus 3 Newtons. So there's a positive sign that actually tells us that the resultant force would actually be acting in the rightward direction, and the magnitude of that would be 3 newtons, right? So the net effect is, or the resultant force of 3 newton is acting on the rightward direction. That means this is a case of unbalanced forces. So you could just say that there's an object which has a 3 newton force acting in the rightward direction, but in case there are multiple forces acting and you just resolve them, and then you get what you get is a resultant force of some positive magnitude, or in fact a negative magnitude. All you need to take care of is that the magnitude of the resultant force is not zero. That would be the case of balanced forces. If the resultant of the magnitude forces is not zero, then we observe a case of unbalanced forces, right? So whenever we have multiple forces acting on an object and you resolve them and you get the resultant force not equal to zero, that would be a case of unbalanced forces, right? So how we can think of an example in our daily life of unbalanced force. You could, find out many examples, but let's think of a parachutist who just dived down right from the airplane, and now he's falling down and he's accelerating. He's under the force of gravity, influence of the force of gravity, and he's falling down. And since he has not opened his parachute yet, he is under the influence of gravity, and there is, although he is facing a lot of air resistance, but that air resistance is not enough to cater the effect of gravity, so he would still be accelerating downwards, right? And he would be under the scenario of unbalanced forces. But as soon as he gains enough velocity, the parachutist will have enough air resistance, right? And once he has enough air resistance to that would be equal to the force of gravity that is actually pulling him downward, then he would achieve a case of terminal velocity in which his velocity would be actually constant. In that case, the force that is acting downwards, that is the force of gravity, will be equaled by the force of air resistance that is actually acting upwards. In that case, his velocity will not be zero, but it will be constant. And whenever we have the constant velocity case, we assume the forces to be balanced, and in that case, when he reaches terminal velocity, he will be under the scenario of balanced forces. But before that, whenever something is accelerating, it is under the influence of unbalanced forces. Similarly, if you see something moving with any acceleration or deceleration, we call that thing to be unbalanced, under the influence of unbalanced forces. So if you hit a ball, you're playing cricket or tennis, and you hit a ball and the ball seems to be accelerating or decelerating, that is the case of unbalanced forces. But if the ball is moving at a constant velocity, that means the forces that are actually acting in the opposite directions are balanced, and that would be the case of balanced forces, right? So you need to take this a little trick in your mind, or keep that trick in your mind, that whenever the forces are balanced and that there's a case of balanced forces, there won't be any acceleration observed in that object. And whenever there is an acceleration observed in any object, that means the forces are not balanced, and there is a net resultant force which is actually causing that acceleration or deceleration. We will actually be talking or discussing more about that when we study Newton's second law, which actually relates the net resultant force to the acceleration of something, right? So you can observe many examples in your daily life that talk about unbalanced forces.